One of the most memorable times was actually early on when I was trying to figure out how to effectively go door to door to businesses, literally walking into businesses and knocking on doors. And this is back in 2007. This is in the last recession. So businesses were shutting down. People were pissed. People were angry. Things were starting to get a little crazy. Unemployment was going to 11% plus. And I remember there was this prospect that I had targeted that I knew would be a great prospect. I'm like, this guy spends a lot of money. He has a huge opportunity. But every time I would cold call on the phones, I would email or do any type of like outbound that way, I could never break through. And what's interesting about the building was it was in this old part of Portland, Oregon, where the main office, for some reason, the way it was set up, it was behind these closed garage doors. So it was always rolled down. It's a very industrial part of Portland. And that was the only way in. And one day I was in the field and I saw the doors actually rolled open and they had regular glass doors right behind. I'm like, oh, perfect. This is awesome. Here's my opportunity. And I see some guys like moving around through the glass door. I can see them like in there. So I go and I walk in and I walk into like this huge warehouse and there's a bunch of people moving around. There's like just dozens of employees and they're kind of gruff and a little rough around the edges. And they're like, hey, what can I do for you? I'm like, oh, I'm here to see Peter. And they're like, okay. And Peter is the owner, right? And I probably should have done this. They're like, is he expecting you? I'm like, sure. Right? Like,
you have to say it.
I'm like, sure. I must sound at least confident enough at the time. So I'm like, all right. So they're like, okay. So it's in this really old building in Portland. So they take me down this hallway and they point me to this room and I walk into the room and the room is like almost pitch black. There's no lights on. It was almost like a movie and probably like 10, 20 feet in, I can see there's a desk lamp and like a computer and a guy on the computer and he's like facing, but everything around is like complete pitch black. I'm like, oh, okay, that's weird. That's fine, whatever. And I can see on his face, he has a big scowl on his face. He just looks pissed, right? I'm like, okay, well, here goes. You know, I walk up, I try to be your typical salesy person back for kind of figure out how to sell. And I'm like, hey, Peter, how's it going? You know, my name is Marcus, blah, blah. You probably got my phone calls and emails. Ha, ha, ha. I try to make some stupid joke. And in the middle of my pitch, he starts shaking his head side to side and says, you fucking salespeople. And I'm like, I can see his face. Like, it's almost like a kettle or a pot of water starting to boil. I can see him getting like redder and redder. I hear him, I'm like, oh, you know, hey, I'm not trying to like sell you something right here. You know, I just want to set some time aside to have a conversation with you. And he was shaking. He's like, you guys never fucking learn. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, haha. I'm not really sure how to, I have no idea how to handle the situation. He reaches into his desk. He grabs something. I don't know what he grabs. He pulls it out. He puts it on the table. It's a gun. And immediately I stop talking. I'm like, oh, okay. You know what? Obviously, I caught you at a terrible time. I will be on my way. And I started backing away. And he picks the gun, starts walking toward me. You guys never learn. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, okay. I just race out. I just take off. Fortunately, he doesn't come after me, right? And like, I'm freaked out. Completely freaked out. This has never happened to me before. Because number one, no one's ever pulled a gun on me before. Number two, didn't expect it to happen. Number three, like, I'm walking into like businesses. So this is like not someone's residential home. This is like an actual business. So I'm like, I'm freaking out. So I don't know what to do. I sit in my car. At first I drove off. I'm like, in case he like comes out, I drove somewhere. I'm like, I just need to kind of like, I'm frazzled. I don't know how to deal with this. So I call my boss. And my boss is like, kind of old school, like been around, seen some, he served like in one of the wars and he was just like kind of rough around the edges. And I call him and I'm like, hey, Paul, something just happened. I don't know if we need to report this. I don't know if we should do something. But this guy that I've been trying to cold call and knock on the door and trying to meet with, I just saw him. Oh, great. How'd it go? I'm like, terrible. He pulled a gun on me. He's like, oh, pulled a gun on you. I'm like, did you fire any shots? I'm like, oh, no. Are you okay? I'm like, well, I'm kind of freaked out, but like, you mean did I get shot? Yeah. Did you get hurt? I'm like, oh, no, I'm totally fine. He's like, oh, so hold on. You didn't get shot. You're not hurt. And he didn't fire any shots at you. He just pulled the gun out. That's it. I'm like, yeah. He's like, but you're okay? I'm like, yes. Like, okay, get back to work. And that was my conversation. I'm like, all right, okay. Now, I wish I could say, Cal, I wish I could say that I was so tenacious and I worked so hard, and then a year later I went and closed him. I never called my guy ever again. Never again.
Oh, man. Here's what's probably the worst part. For me, what's stuck in my head is 100% your manager. It's like, all right, well, finish your rounds.
I know. He was like, every door, every floor, right? The more people, the more hands you shake, the more money you make. I'm like, all right, okay, well, got it. Got it.
Noted. That is now sticking in.
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a good story. I love that you shared that. So to segue into that, where were you at this point in your career?
Yeah, so at that point, I was in about 6 months of my career, and I had never wanted to be in sales. I didn't really see it as a career. I saw it more like a stepping stone at the time. It was more so because I didn't know what I wanted to do. So when this opportunity came up when I graduated, this is like right before the recession, things were starting getting kind of crazy. This is an opportunity for B2B sales, for a startup division for a major Fortune 500 company. So I'm like, okay, cool, like, let's go and let's do it. It was an opportunity to kind of build something from scratch. You kind of learn a lot at that time. I didn't realize we didn't really have product market fit. And these are things I learned later on. I didn't know what it was called at the time. There was no inbound leads, so I didn't know about lead flow. I didn't know about marketing. So we had to become our own marketing and sales machine. So that was like a lot to learn, because even on day one, I'm excited because fresh college grad, fresh haircut. I had wear a full suit at the time, or wear a shirt and tie at the time. And I go into my boss's office, and day one, he gives me a manual. It's 2 inches thick, written by people who've never done the job before. He's like, here you go, good luck, right? So that was like my first taste into B2B sales. And then I didn't know what to do. So I'm like, what should I do first? He's like, oh, cool, I want you to go knock on some doors first. Because remember, we did have a CRM, but we didn't have any leads inside. So
great place to be, yeah.
Right, great, exactly. They didn't buy any data, they didn't do any of those things. So we had to go get the data and put it inside. So we're like, okay, so what do I do? He's like, go outside and go right, and don't come back till you get 30 business cards. I'm like, okay. All right, that sounds good. So that was like my first dive into B2B sales, was like learning right in the field in the recession when businesses were shutting down, how to knock on doors, cold call, and actually sell people within 4 zip codes. Something that didn't have a proven product market fit.
Man, it's funny. I started out as an insurance agent and financial advisor at the exact same time. And I'm from Toledo, Ohio, which is directly tied to Detroit. Well, if you weren't following along, Detroit didn't do so hot during that recession.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I can empathize with that. So when did you start to have that turning point in sales just in general, where it started to click? You clearly wanted to do it because you kept doing it, as you've mentioned, when you didn't really know what you were doing. Doesn't sound like, and I've read in some of your posts, you're like, I wasn't that great at it when I started. What were those turning points that it's like, okay, I started to figure this out and I started to see a lot of success after that?
Well, I think the first point of self-actualization is realizing you suck. And that's like first point, right? And I think a lot of times people aren't willing to admit that, own that, and thus they can't fix it. And the thing was, so early on as I was struggling, the advice everyone told me was, you simply need to work hard, and it's a numbers game. Now, okay, if you're a college grad, you don't know anything, so you're like, okay, that seems to make sense. Sure. So even that same day, the day one, where my boss said knock on 30 doors, I'm like, probably book 1 or 2 meetings at least. I'm like, cool. I walked in over 60 doors that first day and booked 0 meetings, 0 interest. The next day, I'm like, I'm going to try again. Same thing again, 60 plus more doors. Same result. 120 plus doors I walked into by foot to businesses. 0 result. And then the third day, I asked my boss what to do. He said, call them. I called every single one of those that third day. Fourth day, I recalled them again, 0 book meetings. So it's kind of like, what the heck? Like, I'm actually outdoing expectation, activity, and everyone else. I was even crushing everyone activity. No results. Very embarrassing. You like look in the mirror at that point. You're kind of like, what's wrong with me? Kind of fast forward, continued not having any results. And first turning point was I started reading books. That was the thing. Like back then at that time, like there wasn't like LinkedIn. YouTube was kind of starting to take up. And there wasn't easily accessible sales knowledge and insights for free that you can access. So I went to the library. I went and got books. I got every single sales book I can get. You know, Brian Tracy, Zig Ziglar, Og Mandino, all the classics, typical ones. And those were kind of useful to a certain extent, but they're all like written in 1950s, right, 60s, etc. So it's like some principles can apply, but lots of didn't apply anymore. So that was like kind of hard too. But upon that journey, one of the things that I ran into was Tony Robbins' book, Awaken the Giant Within. This is kind of my first step into the personal growth space. And then inside that book, one of the things he said that really stuck with me ever since was, if you don't like the answer, ask a better question. And that was really interesting to me because I realized at that point, every time something bad happened to me, I walk into a business, someone pulls a gun on me. I'm like, oh my God, what's wrong with them? They're crazy, etc. I've walked into business and dogs have bitten me. I'm like, oh my God, what's wrong with that? Why did they let a little dog loose? Like, I'd have people yell at me, curse at me, etc. I'm like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with them? Why is the economy bad? Why is there a recession? Why don't I get any training? Why don't I have a tech stack? Why is my boss terrible? Why is everyone doing better than me? Why have I have a bad terror? I had all these excuses. And because of that, I was asking myself these bad questions. I got bad answers. So the first turning point was realizing I should ask better questions. And it sounds so simple, but that's what was the first stage, which was being able to learn from a mistake, but learn the right lesson from the mistake. Because most people learn the wrong lessons, right? I'm saying it again. So most people learn the wrong lesson. Can you learn the right lesson when you make a mistake so you can actually get better from there? So for example, let's just say I had a cold call. Let's say I got absolutely destroyed, which happened a lot. And instead of saying what's wrong with me, I could shift the question. Where did I learn from this? I learned I need to do better research beforehand, because when I called, I asked someone who wasn't even there and never been there before. Interesting. So lesson from that, do research in advance so I have the right people in advance. Interesting. Small detail, big difference, right? So when you start doing that, you start realizing how you can actually start to improve your game because you start asking yourself better questions. That was the first piece. The second piece, the second transitional point was about 7 weeks in, because I was still not performing at the point. I was still like the worst rep possible. That's when I got threatened with a pit. That was awesome, right? So, it's 7 weeks in. I'm the worst rep. They had high hopes for me because I was an intern prior to the same company. It did really well as an intern. That was more like inside sales. And then now they're like, oh, like you should do well in this. And I'm just a piece of crap, basically. And my boss pulls me on 4 o'clock Friday afternoon, which is never a good sign, and says, hey, man, if you don't turn this around, we're going to have to fire you. I'm like, oh, my God, like, this is a recession. I can't quit now because there's no jobs right now. Like, oh, my God, I have no skills. I'm a fresh college grad. So that was like a slap in the face, right? Around the same time, and this seems completely totally, it's one of those things where in life, I think we have different points, things that happen in our life, and sometimes we don't realize how one dot connects to the other dot till a little bit later on.
Yep.
Right? So one of the dots that happened up front first was, at this point I was pretty stressed, and I'll get an annual checkup with my doctor. Blood tests, etc., do all the normal things, and my blood pressure had really skyrocketed since the last time I'd been there, like a year prior. And I gained a little bit of weight as well, and probably wasn't as healthy as it could have been. And the doctor started diving into my situation. And by the end of the conversation, I basically had committed to eating healthy, working out more, being healthier, and making some changes to my life. And I remember that night, I was actually excited about those changes, right? And I thought to myself, I'm like, wait a minute, how did my doctor convince me to do that? And I realized there was no convincing. They influenced me. How did they influence me? I'm like, all they really did was just ask me questions. Really good questions that made me become insightful to my own situation. They made me realize I've been making all these mistakes. And because now I knew there was a problem, they just showed me a very simple solution. So there's no selling. They simply influenced me to that point. And I realized this whole time, in my sales process, I had been doing the opposite. I walk in, ask a couple questions, and be so focused on the pitch, the features, maybe some of the benefits, trying to convince them to buy from me. And I realized that was actually holding me back from selling. So I started planning the following day, or a couple days later. I'm like, okay, how can I restructure my sales process? So I literally restructured, let's hammer it all out. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try to run it this way. And it was hard because it would focus on me basically not pitching. So I tried the first call and actually progressed forward that deal more than I expected. I'm like, oh, interesting. And I think that week I ended up closing a couple deals, small deals, albeit small deals, but I'm like, oh crap, this is way better. You felt better, etc. So that was like, so you start learning these lessons, right? So that was like a big piece. And I started refining over time, little things here and there, because sales is like a death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's never usually one big thing people are doing wrong. It's usually a bunch of minor little things. So from there, I started to kind of realize, I'm like, man, I can really improve my process. And I kept refining it. And the third month, I went from like bottom to number one in month 3. And then what was really interesting was, so I stayed number one for the next 4 months in a row. And then my boss's boss said, okay, Marcus, you're doing pretty good. We have an opportunity for you. I'm like, great. Like, what's up? He's like, we're going to move you to a different operation. And what we want you to do is we want you to go over there. We're not going to pay you more. We're not going to give you a title bump. But we want you to lead the small team there of 2 actual reps there. And we want you to turn the place around.
Did you want to be in sales leadership?
I didn't really know. I thought I did. I wasn't really sure. But I was like, okay, this makes sense because there's kind of a linear path in that company. On the other part, on the BDC business side, they kind of had a linear path, right? At the time, it was like an $18 billion a year company. Yeah. So it was a very linear path. I'm like, cool. So it's kind of made sense that they're trying to mirror on the B2B side. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, that makes sense. I'd be cool with that. Yeah, for sure. So I'm like, that sounds exciting. That's a good opportunity for me. I took it. And this is another turning point. Because that first step into leadership, I realized how hard leadership is. Like anyone who's gone from the individual contributor to leadership, you realize pretty quickly no one's you. And from a value systems, beliefs, execution, habits, routine, work ethic, you realize very quickly they're not you. So I botched that pretty badly at first because I came in trying to be like, I'm a planner by nature. So I'm very analytical. I like to micromanage every detail to control the outcome, which can be a good or bad thing, right? It doesn't mean I'm a micromanager, but if you're a young leader, that comes off as a micromanager automatically. What I did was I went and created like a 30, 60, 90, 180 day plan because I'm like, okay, what's my goal? My goal is to turn this branch around, be profitable, and prove to my bosses that they made the right decision to hire me so I can become the manager here. That was my goal. So if I can optimize what I do. I've been able to figure out a little bit in sales. I'm definitely no expert, but I'm definitely better than everyone here at least. I'm like, all right, I do something right. There's something that I'm doing that's better than everyone else. Because my results, I was doing about 4 than everyone else. Most people close maybe like 2 accounts a month. I was closing 8 to 10 accounts every single month. New, fresh blood, right? Completely cold. So I'm like, okay, I'm doing something right, obviously. So how can I replicate success? I went and I mapped out a 30, 60, 90 day plan. This is what we're going to do. So I had it all together. And then day 1, I'm with the small crew. And I'm excited. I'm also not really reading the room because their manager just quit and they actually were like the manager, but they were performing, they were doing terrible. So I came in, new guy who actually was younger than all of them, been in the company for less time, running circles around them, did not realize that they had painted me as the golden boy. I was the guy who like the hotshot intern who crushed it as an intern. Yeah, he struggled at first, but now he's crushing it here. Like he's just the teacher's pet, basically. I didn't realize that at the time. So day 1, I'm huddled. I'm like, hey, everyone, listen, like, I know you guys haven't performed here, but I got a plan. Like, first 30, 60 hours, we're going to do A, B, C. We're going to change all these things. I go through my whole plan. And I look at their faces after 15 minutes, and they're just not having it. I don't know how to handle that. I'm like, oh, okay, like, all right, cool. Let's just do our thing today. You know, haha, all right, let's try to roll it off. And I remember going to my girlfriend, now wife, girlfriend at the time, and she's like, how was your first day? I'm like, terrible. I think I should just stay like just in the sales role, right? She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, wow, they just don't get it. I was so naive and so egotistical about myself, right? I was like, I've been number 1 for the last 4 months, which is a very short time when you think about it, and all things considered. I'm like, oh, in over 4 months. And I have this master plan. They wouldn't even listen to me. And she's like, how do they feel? I'm like, I don't know. They should just do what I say. She's like, do you really think so? Yeah. And I swear, she's like, no, dummy. They don't think you have their back. You're already put on a pedestal already in a different way. They're going to have some envy and like jealousy towards you. So you coming in, trying to bring the hammer down on them, it won't influence change. And I'm like, oh my God, you're right. You know, because she usually is. So, you know, the next day, and this is a good lesson that I learned at the time, I sat them all down and I just apologized. I was like, listen, like, I think I just came off totally wrong. Like, I had this plan, but here's reality. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, all I know is I want us to win. I want to help you win. And I'll do whatever we can together. So what do you guys think? You know, what are you guys' ideas? You know, what are you guys' thoughts? And they had all these ideas. And we worked together. And we partner up. And I really learned about how to actually lead without a title and how to actually influence.
Yeah.
And on top of that, when I was able to learn how to do these things, it also taught me how do I take the process that I kind of developed in my head and be able to systemize it, teach other people. Because that's what I had to do. Because of the nature of what we're in. Because if we fail, this branch will close down and we'll get fired. That was it.
Yeah.
I'm like, that wasn't an option. So that was another interesting learning point as well, where I learned about how to build a sales playbook, how to actually scale it. Because at that point, within the next 6 to 12 months, the operation shot to number 1. I stayed the number 1 salesperson. We were all salespeople, right? The people in my office was number 2, number 3, right? So like, we were able to replicate success. So that was interesting to learn as well. I'm not a one-hit wonder. I didn't get lucky, right?
Yeah, so you had a ton of success here, and you rose up the ranks. You figured out, you cracked the code on sales leadership as well. Why start your own company?
That's a really good question. So at that time, I ended up working for that company for several more years, and then I went to a whole different company because I wanted to see if I could do it again. I wasn't sure if I got lucky. I mean, I got lucky. Maybe it was the industry, maybe whatever. I got promoted several times there, and then I went to a whole new industry, a whole new company, and fortunately, we had a lot of success there too. Right, unfortunately, made a lot of same mistakes early on, so I was able to kind of learn from those, which is kind of cool, which is awesome. And that was really cool. It got to the point where we run a really big org. And what's interesting is I never want to start my own business.
Really?
I never wanted to do it.
Never. Growing up or anything, never wanted to be an entrepreneur.
No.
Interesting.
Never. And it's because my parents were entrepreneurs. So they had a restaurant, they did festivals as well, they had a bunch of real estate as well. But growing up, we grew up really poor. And I grew up working in a restaurant. So I remember like literally like sleeping at the restaurant, waking up, working there. I remember like helping my parents out. As a kid, I was working like 20, 30 hours a week, like as a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh my God, this is entrepreneur life. Your parents work 80 hours a week. They don't come to any of your school events or activities. Like that sounds terrible to me. And it just seemed like it was a very unstable thing. Now, I just didn't realize the opportunity, there's different types of entrepreneurs and opportunity vehicles to be in. So my whole life, I was almost essentially, I don't say brainwashed, but I was led to believe that the best path is working somewhere safe. Now, they wanted me to be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, something more prestigious, which is very normal for Asian parents. But I didn't do any of those things, right? But at least I got a corporate job. So it's like there's some stability there. What's really interesting was, so I went, in 2007 when I graduated, I went to started working. And at this point, it worked for several years. So by 2015, I was in my second company already. And I mean, shit, I've been out in the corporate world for what, 8 years at that point? And I've been promoted 10 times that point in 8 years. And I was leading out at this point. I was one of the youngest directors in the company, leading a sales force, about 85 total employees, working for a Fortune 500 company. And people were like, wow, like this is crazy. Dude, like, how did you do this? And even at that company, that was my second company, most people weren't at that. It took them like 10 years to get to that level. I did in 4.5 years. People were like, how did you do these things? I'm like, do what things? I'm just showing up. I'm giving 100%, everything I do. I truly care. I'm passionate. This is what I do. And at that time, people were like, dude, you should write a book. I'm like, write a book? That sounds crazy. I would never write a book, right? I'm like, whatever. So I'm like, but maybe I'll write an ebook. So at this time, I started to like learn about online marketing and like ebooks, etc. And now everyone, the mother has an ebooking course, etc. But at the time, it was really only like the internet crowd knew that. So I'm like, oh, okay, this is interesting. So I bought a program. I learned how to write an ebook, how to turn it into an ebook. I learned how to automate it so someone could pay online and it get distributed automatically. At the time, so there was way more complex. So now it's super easy. And I remember like writing this first book. It was called The Corporate Climb. I call it How to Promote 10 Times in 10 Years, which sounds better than 10 times in 8 years.
I love that. That's right? A really good title and headline there.
Yeah, so I remember I was learning internet marketing in social selling. I was using Instagram as my test place. So I was testing on Instagram. And this was when Instagram was really starting to get really hot. Because this is like 2015, 2016. So I built a little following there. And I just launched this ebook. And I remember like within an hour, I made $9.95. And I'm like, oh my God, someone from the internet paid me money. Like for a B2B guy, right? For someone who's B2B sales, who's used to sit in front of someone, having a conversation, right? To extract money and value from them, and provide them value. Now I'm doing it online. That's weird. And I'm like, wow, this is really interesting. And that blew my mind. I still have a screenshot of it somewhere of that first sub $10. Yeah. Because it was the sign of opportunity. And this blew my mind. So I'm like, interesting. I'm like, you know what I should do is I should build something bigger. You know, so that thing was doing a couple $100s like a month, right? Just pretty easily. So I'm like, okay, you know what I should do is like, I want to build something bigger. I'm like, the next step is an online course, the National Transgression. Now, this again, before everyone in the month has an online course. And at the time, no one had a B2B course. If there was anything out there, it was really, really bad. I'm like, I get a lot of questions about B2B sales. Like I run big orgs, big sales teams, and I'm getting asked the most basic questions that literally I thought everyone should know. Things that I just thought was like normal at this point. I just didn't know. People didn't know. So then I'm like, okay, I should build an online course. Now, this took me a long time to build out because again, the technology is different back then. So I'm like, okay, I should build this out, start recording. So I bought another program, learn how to do it, started to do it, I started building my free time. Now, this is kind of a crazy time for me because I was traveling about 100 nights a year in a hotel, seeing all my teams traveling around. We had a baby during this time, and the company I was with also went through like a major acquisition. So they bought another company, and it was just like very tumultuous, a lot of moving parts, right? So this whole time, I'm just trying to build this little fun thing on the side. So it took me 2 years. So January 2019, I'm finally done. I'm like, oh man, awesome. But then I'm like, what if nobody buys it? What if this is a bad product, right? Because again, it's like when you create something of your own versus selling for someone else, you don't realize how much work it takes to build your own offer and your product and your solution.
100%.
Right? I didn't have PMF. I didn't test anything out. I'm just like, let me just see what happens. So I'm like, fuck it. I just launched it. Right? Woke up, made $2,000 overnight. I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. And my audience wasn't even that big. And it wasn't even the right audience. So I learned a lot of things on Instagram. I posted on LinkedIn. My company wasn't that cool about me posting on LinkedIn. So I posted once a month, more about the business, about like my company stuff versus anything else.
Yep.
So I'm like, okay, that's really interesting. So at that point, it was like, wow, this is an opportunity. Like, this is scalable. I can scale something like this. I can scale a $1,000 product. So at that point, I'm like, what should I do? Now, one of the things where you also get to a point in your career where you start realizing what's really important. And it's like, it's not to say money's not important, but when you made a pretty good amount of money and you're pretty good with managing your money, investing and multiplying, doing all that stuff, like you start realizing like money's totally cool, but if you're pretty simple, you don't spend really that much, and you put yourself in a spot where you can do whatever you want. And that's what I did. So I'm like, okay, I can keep doing what I'm going to do, and I can see the lifestyle of what my life's going to be like when I look at like my VPs, etc., and everyone else. I don't want that. I'm like, what I really want is more time. I want time freedom, right? That's exactly what I want to be able to do with who I want whenever I want. That was just really important to me. And when you read any business biography, the wealthiest people in the world, most of them will say the same thing. They're like, I just want more time back.
Yeah.
Time with family, friends, relationships, do what I want, and just have fun, do stuff. So I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Now, again, I didn't just quit my job on the spot. I'm like, I'm out, see you later, right? I'm like, I want to be strategic about this. And I had a President's Club trip coming up in August. I'm like, I want that. I'm just going to go to that. Okay, I want that. My year-end bonus in stock, I want all that for sure. That happened in June. We had our earnings call that would happen in September. That would skyrocket everything.
All right.
So I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna time this all out because it'll be the earnings call in September. If I can't time it all out, I'll get everything I need, and then I can wait for my vesting period to also hit as well, and I can just exit out right after that. So that's exactly what I did. Timed everything out, and then exit out and left September 19, 2019, and went all in on the business. Because at that point, it was about time freedom, right? I forgot the other point why I also left too, which is also really important because time was probably number one. The second piece was you start realizing what's really important to you, and one of the other things that's really important to me is impact. And the thing was that I had built a pretty good reputation. Like everyone knew me, all the execs knew me. I was around in corporate jets periodically and stuff, and that was cool. Like I'm still in the corporate training videos.
Yeah.
Like people still talk about me, so which is kind of weird. Some probably hate on me now, which is what it is, but it doesn't really matter. But anyways, but it was cool. But what I realized was like, I'm like, I want to have more impact. I had like my team, etc. And I also mentored 10 other people within the organization as well to help them rise up from individual contributors to sales leaders, other directors as well. I was mentoring them as well. And I'm like, I wanted to make more of an impact. And what was really interesting was even with the course, when I first launched it and people started buying it after the launch, I would get emails from people that be like, wow, this really helped me. This really works. And that was like, wow, this proves to me that this works outside of my industry. This proves to me I could scale this. And that was like, that also made me realize, I'm like, if I stay at this company, I can impact people within the company, or I can untether myself and bet on myself and be able to create a business where I can impact way more people, you know? And that's why that was a big part of the business, was being able to put it in a spot where I can do whatever I want, who I want, but also help the people I want to help. That's why I made the leap.
That freedom of money, freedom of time, freedom of relationship, or do you do strategic coach?
What do you mean?
So there's an organization called Strategic Coach, and what you just described is their whole thing. First you get freedom of money, then you get freedom of time, or I'm sorry, first you get freedom of time, then you get freedom of money, Then you get freedom of relationship. So it's essentially I can work when I want, with who I want, whenever I want.
That was the thing. So I basically, it's, I guess the same. Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. No, that's pretty cool. And that's something that with me personally, that's 100%. It's something that's been on my mind a lot more, right? You know, you can do it two ways. You can just grind it out and you'll make an absolute ton of money. But I think it gets to a certain point where I really want more freedom of time than I care as much about the next thing. Because you can only buy so many cool things. That's just kind of the reality.
Oh, yeah. If I could share this, I think this will make a lot of sense. I remember when I made the right decision, when it hit. Because when you go and start your own business, there's always that fear. There's a lot of uncertainty. Like, I think a lot of people think, oh, founders, they don't have fear. Actually, hell yeah, I got tons of fear and anxiety, right? But it's acting in spite of the fear and anxiety. And I remember 1 month after, and I was second guessing myself. I was like, oh man, was that a right decision? I left behind like 7 figures in equity. Like, I have what is that really the right move? Like, you start going back and forth and you just kind of questioning, like, oh, maybe it's easy to go back to work for somebody else. I don't know. You just have all these doubts. And about 1 month in, and my kid was pretty young. He's about 2.5 at the time. And before this happened, because I traveled so much, anytime I get upset, cry, hurt, he would naturally go to mom, right? That was like, go to mommy, race to mommy, right? Yeah, I didn't really think much about it. Even when I was in it, it just happened because she was around more. But a month after, and I remember right after it happened, after I made the move, he's like, oh, Dad, you're here. I'm like, yeah, I'm here, whatever. You got to see me every day, which is interesting. I got to take him to school. I could do all these I couldn't do before. And a month after, I remember like he hurt himself, got upset, and he ran to me. And that's when I realized, I'm like, this is why. That's pure freedom. You don't get the time back. Like, your kid, they're probably going to love hanging out with you for the first 10 years of their life. And after that, who knows what's going to happen? So I'm like, I better capitalize it now because now he's 6. So I'm still thinking that same way.
So that's so cool. I love that. As you're growing this business, what's your goal? You've already been incredibly successful in the business that you've grown. You've got a gigantic presence across multiple social channels, LinkedIn, newsletter, all sorts of different outlets. What is the goal for you? What do you want out of this? Yeah.
So I think I'm going to continue to optimize for the 4 Fs that I talk about, right? The 4 Fs. So fortune, right? Let's building wealth, stacking cash, family, freedom, and fulfillment, right? This is why I optimize for every single day. So if I'm always doing things to optimize for, that's really, really important. But it's also being able to start realizing I can't just create whatever solution and offer because that may require me sacrificing time for my family, which I'm not willing to do. So it's find that really good balance. So that's the key. So as part of that business. So when I think about that, it's okay, if I build a new offer, what's going to have more impact? And do I enjoy doing that? That's what I always think about. Because at the end of the day, it's like, goals in mind, but not really, right? If that makes sense. Because there's certain things I also want more. I don't really want those. It's more so like, how can I create the life I actually want? Like to wake up when I want, do what I want, etc. How do I design it to be fully optimized to me only doing things I like to do? And that's what the top people do. When you look at someone like Oprah Winfrey, she probably works like 1 to 2 hours a day. Why? She freaking loves that part of it. And the rest of it, she does whatever she wants. And I think about how can I create my life to be the same way, And it's also, when you add to this as well, you get addicted to the process, if you will, as Scott Lee says. Like, you get addicted to the process. Over time, and everything I've done, I've learned to, I don't want to say enjoy the grind, because I think people read that the wrong way. I enjoy the process. I enjoy what I do. I enjoy the building. I enjoy this. Because there's something about when you able to take something in your mind's eye and you're able to turn it to reality, it's very hard to put into words what that really means. So for me, yeah, maybe there's some end goals, kind of, but not really, because I see it as more seasons. Like even like this current program that I'm running right now for BB salespeople, like we're doing really well. We're helping a lot of people. It's really, really awesome. It's great. This is my current season. I'll do this for a while. I'm still good with it, but over time, I'm sure like, okay, what's my next season going to be? What do I want to do next? Who do I want to help next? Or do I keep building upon that? I don't know, right? I think it's good to think in like long time horizons, like 10, 20, 30, 50 years out. But also in the seasons may shift a little bit. It's kind of like when you're driving on a freeway, you know where you can go for the end destination, but you're enjoying the drive, and sometimes you can go off the freeway. You can speed up. You can change lanes depending what's in the road. You may detour off a little bit to go a different path, then get back on, right? It's just all part of life.
100%. And I think you hit on something that's always been important to me, and just love to practice, right? Like, love to practice as much as you like playing the game. And if you can find something where you love to practice as much as you love playing in the game, like, run with it. You're probably going to be really successful at it. So the last question I have for you is, if you could have a conversation with your younger self, age totally up to you, what would that conversation be? What advice would you give them?
So think in longer time horizons and make decisions based off that. I think when you're young, you're always thinking very short term. Like, you always think you have the rest of your life. You always think you have all this time. You're always like, oh, I'm young, it's fine. But you end up just making dumb decisions, frankly. And when you think on a longer time horizon, you end up becoming much more well-rounded. You make more strategic decisions. For example, there's always pros and cons, because some people might say, hey, Marcus, that's really cool. Like, 2 companies in 14 plus years, that's really cool. You had a lot of success. That's really awesome. And then there's some people that look at me and say, Marcus, man, you're doing pretty well as an entrepreneur. Maybe you should start that sooner. And I think one of the things that early on, I was very risk adverse. Very risk adverse. And I think there's always going to be pros and cons to everything. But because of that, I was probably more gun shy making some bigger changes and decisions. Like, I'll give a really simple example. I remember even when the market tanked in 2007, 2008, I'm like, now probably a good time to buy some stock, right? But I'm like, I'm too scared. And that was like, in hindsight, obviously you probably could like make even more money because of that, right? Who would have known, right? But it's one of those things where the principle is still the same. It's more so of, if you think on a longer time horizon, you start realizing there's always patterns to everything. And you can hopefully make better decisions now that'll pay you long-term dividends. And if you start thinking of it this way, it really helps you in every part of your life, whether it's relationships or anything else, for instance. And I think in some parts of my life, I did do a good job with that. And other parts, I didn't do a good job. For example, I think back to one good decision I made was early on, especially in college. I went through the run of dating whomever. That was cool. Meeting people, it's really fun and whatever. And then I got sick of the game. And I'm like, this isn't what I want. And a very set criteria. I was like that psycho who had an idea, like, who he wants to be with. And it was in my head, at least. And I found her. And it was my senior year. I'd known her, and then I realized it was her my senior year. And that was a good long-term decision, right? That was a good long-term decision. She was resistant to it, but, we started dating eventually, and now I married her, and we have a great life. We have a kid now. So that's a good example of long-term thinking that I think most people would have given up at the first rejection. She rejected me for really 5 years until we started dating. 4 years until we started dating. But it was a long-term move, is what my point. So if you think long-term, you'll make better decisions, hopefully in the short term, that'll pay you long-term dividends.
The beauty about long-term thinking is it makes the short-term setbacks don't sting as bad, because you understand it's just a bump on the long road. So I think that's excellent. Marcus, this has been a blast. Thanks for coming on today, man.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's been an absolute blast.
I love it.